and welcome to Stef Talks Trash. I'm your host, Stefanie Valentic, Editorial Director of Waste360. And today, I'll be talking trash with Ryan Fogelman, the VP of Fire Elimination Solutions with Fire Rover. April 2021 was the worst month for waste facility fires since 2016. I'll be speaking with Ryan about the causes of these fires and about fire prevention. Enjoy the show.
But thanks for coming on today to talk about fires. It's, facility fires, landfill fires, all kinds of fires, because, this is something that we've been seeing a lot in the news lately, especially in relation to, the battery fires that, in MRFs. So if you want to go ahead and, take it away and kind of start by explaining what you do and kind of, we can just jump into some data and see, what the trends are with these fires.
Yeah, and I mean, so basically we developed a product called the Fire Rover that puts fires out remotely through through the internet, right? Basically the easiest way to say it. And so in 2016, I had met with one of my customers at the time, which was Advanced Disposal, but they were a prospect, and I met Brent Shows, and basically it was kind of funny, but I basically showed him our system and I said, hey, it's great, right? What do you think? And he goes, oh, it's awesome. I love it. Like, I agree with you. I said, okay. And then I'm like, how many do you want? And he was like, why do I need it? And I was like, because you have fires. And he was like, do I? And I was like, yeah. I mean, it was public knowledge at the time that he had fires, and basically, or that Advanced had a couple kind of major fires. And, he basically said to my competitors, right? And at that time it was like, I don't know. Right. So I went online. I mean, I went to law school, I do a ton of research. I went online. I'm expecting to see like, this is how many fires, this is how many, with everything. And literally there was no data at all. I reached out to associations and presidents and, everyone that I possibly knew in the industry at that time, and no one had any information on it. So I started trending fires, and, I'll start to share, I put this out each month, and, I started doing an editorial for, Waste360, just kind of showing in 2018 was really the crazy year, from a lithium-ion battery wave that hit the US, Canada, and then I was seeing it in other countries as well. And I can show you, Japan, Australia, UK, they all saw the same kind of wave, an increase in fire incidences. So like, if you break it out, really there was pre-lithium ion batteries and then lithium ion batteries, right? And so, in 2018 was when I feel that the industry woke up, right? And I think, and again, I can talk from an insurance perspective, and like, they just realized like, hey, these fires aren't going away. And this is not a traditional thing that happens once every, 2-3 years, right? This is something that actually happens more often than we give it credit for. And we're seeing these lithium ion batteries and everything. Well, in 2019, the numbers went down a bit. And again, there is a ton of fire prevention planning that was done, and like really looking at pile separation and other kind of best practices, right? So from my perspective, the person who has a fire, right, or the operator that has a fire, I mean, good operators might have less fires, but there are fires inherent in what we do. In 2020, the numbers were down again, but it was a pandemic year. So, obviously in some of the articles I've written, it's like, we didn't know what the pandemic has done or why the trends are that way. So when I did my annual report this year, I really tried to focus on the past 5 years and how does it fit? And then, again, we started out January, February, sort of normal. And then March, we basically hit one of the largest, months since 2018, when we started having issues. So, I saw that. And then the first week I was doing a presentation for National Waste and Recycling Association, and I put these numbers together, and we had hit like some crazy numbers. And so I feel like every day I've been following, and a lot of times, I'll consolidate at the end of the month. In April, every day I was following this, and, we ended up having the worst month we've ever had. So, this is pre-pandemic, or, this is, lithium ion batteries. And again, the issue with lithium ion batteries is that there are more and more and more and more of these that are coming into our waste stream. And, prevention and best practices and education and other things, they only can do so much. since that time, the Fire Rover system, I mean, we've only had 2 catastrophic losses. Both of those can be, explained. In April alone, we actually saved 75 fires from occurring and getting to be major fire incidences. So, that's really in a nutshell what I've been doing and, what I see. And again, maybe March and April are an aberration. I hope they are. We've certainly seen them, in other months. In like 19 in September, we saw, a higher month, and the same with in August. But this April and March were pretty bad. So hopefully, this is where we have to really revisit and start to look at the things that we looked at in 18 to try to figure out how to best combat the problem.
So, as you say, you've written a lot of articles. A lot of articles have been published in mainstream media outlets about these lithium-ion battery fires. What needs to be done, not only from a public perspective, but also from, the waste haulers and collectors to kind of prevent these fires and make sure that these batteries are not entering the waste stream and not entering in places where it's going to cause, dangerous situations.
Yeah, and I think there's 2 answers to that question, right? Like, one is how can you stop batteries from getting into the waste stream, right? And if you break up the types of fires that we see, basically as we look in, there's what I started doing was basically putting waste paper plastic together. And what these have in common, not only with the operations perspective, they're transfer stations and transfer stations and basically MRFs, right, that we would call.
Mm-hmm.
But I put those together because these are the types of situations where you can educate the batteries not to be put into the system. And again, like, that's one side. Scrap metal, it's a lot harder, right? Because with scrap metal or with construction and demolition, it's more difficult because you really can't educate your way out of putting lithium-ion batteries in former building, so if a car gets in a car accident, you can't, you could do your best to prep it, but it's something that the public education really only focuses on one area of the supply chain, right? So again, I mean, that's a huge issue that we see, right? So I look at it, the way you solve this problem is education, right? It's preparedness and training. So really it's how do you become the best operator and deal with these hazards the most effectively as possible? And then technology and innovation. And, what I've come to the conclusion that, like, there's an inherent risk of fire in our business. And that's not a bad thing, right? At the end of the day, you can have an inherent risk of fire in an industry, which there's a ton of them, but you have to have the right things that will prepare and, ensure that the operations run safely, right? Think about gasoline, fracking. I mean, there's a ton of different industries it's an okay thing. I think in the waste and recycling industry, we've seen fires all these years with lithium-ion battery. It has now made it to a point where we can't just ignore it, right? And the problem with like waste paper and plastic is to solve the problem, you would in theory have to remove every single lithium-ion battery hazard out of that stream. Well, that's literally an impossible task, right? I mean, it's impossible for you to say to me that, like, I can tell you that propane tanks can get pre-sorted. I mean, and some still get through sometimes, right? Like, but you can't slow down the process and guarantee that you're going to get rid of the risk. So really, you have to figure out solutions that work on the back end and actually fight these. And you still, at the same time, it's almost like, the dog's chasing the tail, right? Because at the end of the day, you have more and more end of life. You have more lithium-ion batteries. I mean, they're basically saying, I mean, and I've published some studies, but like literally today versus 10 years from now, we're going to have like some ridiculous amount of growth inside lithium-ion batteries, right? And again, I look at this, and this is a really big issue, right? Waste and recycling operators are victims. And I don't say that as a way to say that, they're weak or anything. But if you look at the entire battery supply chain and you say manufacturers are making products that we as a public are demanding, right? So basically we're demanding those. So it's not like the manufacturers are bad people, right? They're going out and they're giving us what we want. But at the end of the day, all we're saying, or all I'm saying, is that the battery manufacturers, they seem to be okay with paying for education because it publicly shows that they're doing something about it. The same way utilities would do energy efficiency programs, or they would promote and they would do it's basically the biggest bang for their buck from a PR perspective, but it doesn't really help solve the problem that they're causing, which is fires in the end of the supply chain. So how do you get them to help support the operators and the fire professionals? And that's really what I push for, right? And I don't see anybody having this conversation out in the industry yet, and I think we have to have more of it.
So what about battery recycling? There's been a lot of companies that are popping up that are kind of entering this space. That whole process is just kind of, just starting up to kind of, help mitigate this problem a little bit and kind of move it, across to a different section of the waste stream. But, what can you tell me about those companies and how they'll either help or, what needs to be done to, kind of help, alleviate this problem?
It's its own burgeoning industry, right? And again, if you look at, chemical recycling, which is basically hazard material recycling, and we protect a lot of those types of facilities, and like rubber is kind of its own thing, right? E-scrap, in theory, e-scrap is part of scrap metal, right? But at the same time, it's becoming its own, because of the risks that are happening, right? If you're dropping computers, you don't want to drop them at a scrap metal facility. And I think there were times when certain processors didn't really understand what they were dealing with and the real hazards that they were dealing with. I mean, I think, e-scrap is almost like everything else, right? Like there are good used car salesmen, there are bad used car salesmen, there are, actors who are working and there's actors who are starving. So like at the end of the day, there's some really great e-scrap providers out there. And again, I am 100% for getting as many batteries as you possibly can get through whoever it is, if it's through Call to Recycle, if it's through the retailers, like any way you can get a battery not to go in a waste and recycling stream, or pull it out of a car, or like from construction and demolition. I mean, if you have a building that has a fire, you're going to have a lot more lithium-ion batteries versus a building that's demolished, right? Because you can actually pull everything out. So like as you kind of look at it, I'm all for trying to get these to specialized businesses that for electronic scrap that can deal with these. And there's some really cool things they're doing with shredders and like pulling off the types of magnets and making sure that we're getting the rare earth metals, which is another issue that we're having big problems with from a China and US perspective. But I think it's one of those things where the devil's always in the details. So we saw 4 fires in December alone, in electronic scrap fires, so I think it's one of those that I think there's good operators and there's not so good operators, or I shouldn't even say not so good, but just, anyone can basically start taking, personal storage materials in a lot of jurisdictions and basically call themselves an electronic scrap provider. So, they do have inherent risks. And, I'll say this, we built the fire sprinkler system replacement for a lithium-ion battery operation, right? So, I think there's a lot of laws and regulations that are happening now, and they don't know where to classify waste and recycling companies. E-scrap is completely different, right? If you there's guys who have only operations that have 100 million or 100,000 pounds, and they process 2.5 million pounds a year through one facility that is pallets and pallets of lithium-ion batteries. The problem with those is that they have explosive risk, and our type of solution will literally see it and start to fight it right away, which is what you need to do to try to slow down thermal runaway. And so what we created was a fire, like a quick connect. So you put these in a building, we see it, we start shooting it, the fire department comes, they actually hook up outside, and it allows them to take a defensive approach to fighting these fires. Because at the end of the day, a firefighter shouldn't have to go into a building, right? When they're told to take a defensive approach, that means that they're basically protecting the public. But you still have to fight the fire, and a sprinkler system with lithium-ion batteries doesn't work. Now, take that, if you're looking at the scale from, all the way from one side to the other, you look at MRFs, they're dealing with these small little lithium-ion batteries, right? So some of them are bigger, some of them aren't. I mean, we had a provider 3-4 years ago who was had literally a delivery of lithium-ion batteries dumped onto their tip floor. And actually on YouTube, I have, the truck started fire and it was like popcorn everywhere. So like, there are things that we see in MRFs and, in recycling that, are, I call them aberrations, but it's a danger because people really aren't educated on how to handle these things, or they do it, typically it's accidentally. So, I think it's one of those things that, to answer your question, e-scrap providers are great. We need more of them, and we need a ton of them, and we need to get every single battery out of the waste stream as possible, but knowing that we're never going to get every battery out of the waste stream with the amount that are growing.
Well, absolutely. Do you have any videos that you'd like to share, kind of demonstrating, not only, what happens if it does enter the waste stream?
What you'll see here is, it's a quick explosion. And again, what you're trying to do is protect it from collateral assets. So what we use is a product that's about 150 times wetter than water. We get onto it right away. So we're doing a couple things here. One, we're trying to cool it so that it doesn't go thermal runaway. And again, when you're dealing with that, when you're in, a facility or a pallet of batteries, it's a different problem, right? Because once that explodes and there's thermal runaway, now you have a domino effect. So it's a little different when we're dealing with that. With MRFs, as long as you have one here and there, it's different. What you want to do is you want to pre-soak it and pre-wet it. This is 150 times wetter than water. And most of the time it explodes, we hit it, it's done, it's nighttime, so next morning we send to our customer, hey, we had an event, not a problem, right? And then every once in a while we have these events that, like, this is why we have so much power in the unit, right? Because it's way more than enough. But when you get something like these, again, you're done. I mean, I can show you a couple other pretty crazy examples. I think like this one here, watch, this is a perfect example, because a lot of people will say, hey, we have our floor. Well, so this happened, a fire actually starts in the tip floor, and you'll actually see the truck drive all the way around it, right? They don't see it. And again, they shouldn't. They're not here to go find fires, right? I mean, you see how that starts. It starts in the back pile, like the back pile of the building. And then you'll see this truck will actually come all the way around the loader, and it brings material all the way down. And again, like, there's not really a lot of smoke. Everyone's a little bit different. I mean, I don't know that this was, we don't know what this fire was. I mean, because a lot of times there's so much stuff in there that you couldn't figure out what was in it if you wanted to. But again, just because someone's on the floor doesn't mean that they're paying attention to fires. And, you'll see this thing going where it gets hot enough, I'll move it faster so that we're not. I mean, again, that's a minute 6, right? It seems like it's forever, but really, if we're shooting it within a minute's time, right? I mean, normally it takes, the fire department gets there, and I can show you an example after this of like the anatomy of a fire. So right now we can't shoot because they're in the way, right? So we don't want to hit anyone. And again, that's part of, we have a human being who's controlling and watching this. And then we'll start spraying the minute they move, right? So, I mean, you see how hot that got and how fast. That's 1 minute of a fire. Every single person who's in a fire department or who's in the fire industry has a saying, and there's a million different ones, but basically it's a fire gets twice as expensive and twice as large every certain amount of time. It's every 30 seconds, every minute, whatever it is. But I mean, that's the case, right? These fires get big and fast quick. And sometimes they take forever and sometimes they go up in seconds. And, sometimes there's an accelerant and sometimes there's not. So, you see this guy, once he saw that we were shooting it, he's going to come out and he's going to try to pull it out. Again, whether it's a deep-seated fire or not, it depends on how we fight these.
It's really important to kind of showcase, what's going on from a fire prevention perspective because of how dangerous, not only just these batteries, but other waste, is and what can happen once it enters the waste stream. So.
Absolutely. And again, I mean, and I think that's a lot of it's public and a lot of it is focused on that education piece. And again, like, I don't want anyone to think that I'm not 100% on board with public education. I am 100% on board, but like, to me, I think we need to push to go to the next step, which is helping the operators, because again, insurance is hard to get, and I've been working tirelessly to try to work with insurance companies to bring them back in, and I think we're having a decent amount of success, with insurance companies, because once you have one of our systems, I literally can take their risk of fires down to a level prior to lithium-ion batteries. And again, it's one of those things where people make fun of my nickname, right? Like they joke with me, like, why do you call yourself Lion Tamer? And everyone thinks it's a networking thing. I mean, anyone in the industry understands it's lithium-ion batteries. And if you look in the industry and you try to figure out, okay, I didn't name myself that. It's not like I came up with this great idea and said, hey, I want to, I don't believe that you should nickname yourself, right? But I mean, the insurance company, like the insurance industry, that's who named me the Lion Tamer, because at the end of the day, the insurance industry sees this, and we're not just working in waste and recycling, but they see this as, a benefit of trying to fight a fire faster. This is the WISH standard, right? And basically, they've developed this definition based on, it's a fire prevention plan. And basically, according to their guidance, if you have a waste and recycling fire that's out within 4 hours, it's considered a successful incident. And again, 4 hours to me is we look at it, if I can get a fire and in the first 10 minutes respond, I can, number one, set that tripwire earlier in the process because I can catch heat abnormalities. And then number two, I can call the fire department faster than anyone else. So you saw that video before, like no one even saw it. If I call the fire department, within minute one of a fire versus, minute when a sprinkler system in theory could go off. I mean, we have sprinkler systems in half of so we have over 200 facilities now. Half of them have no sprinklers, half of them have sprinklers. The ones I've never had a sprinkler system go off when we were fighting a fire. And even when the fires are bad, it's because the difference is you have to be 180 degrees for the sprinkler head to go off, or you have to, I'm looking at like the pinpoint accuracy of a 4-inch radius of a fire. And I see that it's direct heat. So it's night and day. And, a lot of these guys are coming out and saying, hey, we created this automated this, and we've done this. The thing that's made our solution, unique is that you have a human being who basically looks at it and verifies it. So what that allows us to do is to set our temperature gauges so low that we get a ton of false alarms. I want to see when the forklift set us off, right? Because if I don't set it low enough, then I become like anything else, your guys become immune to hearing these alarms. And then when there's a real issue, they don't fight them, right? So, it's one of those things where FM has actually classified us as the first smart monitor. They created a specific definition, and we're going down the path of getting FM certified. But it's one of those things where it's like, if the biggest issue is really trying to catch as many fires as possible, as fast as possible. And if you look at it, the severity of the fire is a big issue. So this was in Europe, but they had said that if you look at your fires, how many of them were you down for more than a day? And 75%, they're down more than a day. That's a huge issue, right? I'm catching it. I mean, even the bad ones, we have people back to work the next day. There's very little cleanup. There's not an environmental issue outside of the material that's being built. So, it's a different way to fight a fire, right? But it actually focuses on the only way to really catch lithium-ion battery fires is to catch them quick, right? That's what we focus on.
So, final thoughts, wrapping it up, where do you see this going in the future? What do you hope to achieve? And we kind of talked about this before, but, in terms of the consequences of what can happen, either from a legislative perspective, a fire prevention perspective, what needs to be done to, reduce the number of these fires?
What I need, or what I think the industry needs, is a couple things. One, that they need backing from the industry, right? Which, again, we've had pretty good backing from waste and recycling, but I think there's other industries that inside the waste and recycling piece that could do more. I mean, I think they're pushing more for fire brigades, right? Which is the last thing you want to do unless you're going to make a formal fire brigade. Formal fire brigades are great, right? I mean, you look at oil companies and large refineries have their own fire department on scene. Now, I don't think from a cost perspective the business makes sense to start to do that. And again, I think the idea that my hope is that, you look at the Fire Rover client saves. And again, this number, it's actually been changed. So in this month's article, I break through what the real definition is, because, as a business, we're deep enough in, and we have, 8 of the top 10 waste and recycling customers, but, we're still refining our business constantly. And I think from a definition perspective, we're now able to track every single save, right? Where I don't think we did as good of a job in the beginning. So, I mean, that's where that 75 number comes. And I think it's really trying to play with this. How many reported public fires, right? Which basically reported fires in a media outlet mean that, they got the attention of someone, right? So that's why I think these are kind of the 2 alarm, 3 alarm, 5 alarm, 7 alarm, fires, trying to figure out what those known incidents is and getting the numbers down. So it's not that I don't care if we have 1 million fires a year, if we lose 0 facilities. So really the idea and the thing that I'm fighting for is like, how do we get enough funding and how do we get enough backing where the insurance industry is healthy enough for the waste and recycling industry to do their job. And if government needs to step in, that's fine. I don't personally think that government needs to step in. I'm a pure capitalist, right? Like I believe that like we can solve our own problems. But, with that being said, if the battery manufacturers are held to some sort of a deposit, which they are being, let's take 20% of that money and put it towards actual equipment for the fire departments that, again, you have a waste and recycling operation, there's 8,000 or 7,000, right? So they're in every jurisdiction. Some of them have volunteer fire departments, like a majority, right? Like rural areas, so really the idea is like, let's give them the ability. Some of the fire departments can't even afford an environmentally friendly phone, right? Like they're just using water. And at the end of the day, it's not just about putting water on a fire. It's about let's get it quick and get it correctly so that we don't have to waste all that water, have all that get in the environment and do all the other things. So I just think there's a cleaner way to do it. And, it'd be nice to have all the industry players looking at this instead of the, manufacturers of batteries who have a ton of lobbyists who are fighting for their cause, as opposed, I mean, literally they could take the money that they probably paid a lobbyist and, it would probably cost, if we have 4,000 to 5,000 waste and recycling companies, and if each of them needed $100,000 a year, we're not talking about a big number from what they're probably paying anyways for everything, right? So I think it would be let's give the operator some help, and give them the right tools, and let's get the fire professionals trained and ready to fight these types of fires. So that's the one thing I would ask. And again, you think if I bring this up and a lot of people say, yeah, I agree, but it's hard to actually get done. Right. I mean, I don't have an ear to the president of the United States. It's going to be like, yeah, no problem. I mean, so there's all these other things that everybody's fighting. And again, we're just one, we're one, one piece of hay, right, in the haystack. And, so that's why I'm kind of going out and basically pushing for this type of an agenda, because honestly, I think it's needed. And I think we need a healthy waste and recycling operation or infrastructure in the United States or globally to make, to obviously do what they do well, which is guarantee that we have the least amount of product or tonnage in our landfills as possible, right? So, we have to help them do that.
Once again, thank you for joining me for this episode of Stef Talks Trash. For this and other episodes, please visit waste360.com. Have a great day.